All right, New Testament readers, it is week 32. We're 6 weeks into the second half of the year. So moving along, getting through the book. We continue with Romans this week, and we're going to continue at the pace of about a chapter a day. Now, I want you this week to notice especially how Romans deals not just with how God forgives us, but also how he transforms us and thereby fulfills the bigger picture, the bigger program that he has. When Paul says in Romans 1, the gospel is the power of God for salvation, it is about both forgiveness and transformation. Because, well, frankly, being forgiven without being transformed is still pretty miserable. Okay, we don't want to be left in our sinful condition and just forgiven all the time. So, chapter 7 is continuing what we read last week in chapter 6, showing us the newness of the gospel, the way it creates a new set of values and relationships. And Paul compares it to a new marriage after a death as another way of thinking about this relationship that we have now to righteousness instead of sin. But that chapter goes on to acknowledge that we all seem to fail in this. You know, Paul says very honestly, the thing I want to do is the thing I don't do. The thing I don't want to do is the thing I do. Wretched person I am, who will deliver me from this body of death? And the answer is God will. In chapter 8, then lays out how there is no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. The Spirit is living in us. The Spirit is transforming us. The Spirit is making us different, connecting us to God. Through that, God is fulfilling his plan for the cosmos. The whole universe is groaning with God's people, waiting for their redemption. God is making his whole world new. And then a key verse, Romans 8:28. All things work together for good. We've read that in English as for those, but there's a good argument to be made that the original language is saying through those who are called according to his purpose. In other words, yes, God is working in us for what's best for us, but especially he's working in us to fulfill his larger plan. You and I are part of God's program of taking his world back. And the way he's transforming us and what we do in the world as a result is a big, big part of that. So we end in chapter 8 with the inseparable power of the love of God and the tremendous nature of God's eternal victory. All right, well, where do we go then in chapter 9? Where does this take us? Into a different question in chapters 9 to 11. And really here the issue is, Paul, people are saying, if what you're saying is true, then God has been unfaithful to Israel because many people in Israel don't believe this gospel, and by your explanation, they should be excluded. So does that mean that Israelites are just included whether they believe in not, or does this mean that God really likes Gentiles better? This could play into either group's hand, as it were. So, what does Paul say to that? Well, he says a big no. God is not being unfaithful to Israel. He's saying in chapter 9, Israel has always been defined by God, not every descendant of Abraham. After all, it is Isaac, not Ishmael. It is Jacob, not Esau. And remember what Isaiah said. He spoke of a remnant of the people, a portion of them, who truly belong to God. But chapter 10 says it's not as if God has made it hard for Israel or anyone else to come to him. The gospel is right there, as God has always made his word available to his people. It kind of reminds us of what Paul said back in chapter 1. It's all there for us if we want to hear it. And then chapter 11 wraps this up where Paul says, it's not as if all Israel has fallen away. I am a follower of Jesus, so are thousands of others, of people. It's just like the time of what's that guy's name? Elijah. That's it. Elijah, when God says, I've got 7,000 who haven't bowed the knee to Baal. And so even now, he says, God has broken out some of the natural branches to graft in the wild ones, the Gentiles, but he can break those out and put the people of Israel back in as well. So what does all of this mean? It means at the end of the day, all Israel will be saved, not because all Jewish people or all the descendants of Abraham by blood will be saved, but the true Israel of God are those who believe his message, and his message has now come to us through Jesus. So God is faithful and God is fulfilling his promise for the ages. This wraps up the first part of the book of Romans then, that eventually takes us into the second part, which is going to tell us how we live that gospel out and how the Church of Rome and how the Church of Champaign-Urbana and the Church of America and the Church of the 21st century can live faithfully to the gospel in a way that reflects the love of God expressed in the gospel and the transforming power of the Spirit at work in our lives. There's going to be a lot of radical getting along and loving each other that's going to be going on around here, people. All right, keep reading. God bless you all.